I know you sometimes feel guilty putting yourself first. And maybe you understand why this is and it makes sense to you. Or maybe you feel a little confused as to why you can't just get over feeling guilty when you know it's healthy to put yourself first sometimes. You know you should, practice better self-care, move your body, take time to drink water, take time to rest. And you know you should set those boundaries. And so maybe there's a part of you that's confused why you can't just get over this guilt. But before we dive into the therapy techniques to help you manage this guilt successfully so you can take care of yourself, prioritize yourself, and give yourself the things you know you need, I want to first just say it's completely understandable why you feel guilty putting yourself first sometimes, even if it's not logical. One of the primary reasons you may feel guilty putting yourself first is because we live in a culture, if you're American, that super emphasizes productivity as the source of our worth. When we're busy, when we're working, when we're pushing towards a goal, whether that's related to fitness, like running, or a business, or our career, a degree, our culture really celebrates being busy to pursue goals, to be productive, to be successful. And so a part of you may feel guilty putting yourself first simply because you've internalized the message that's all around us. It's the kind of the air we breathe as Americans, that you're only worthy when you're producing, when you're creating, when you're busy. Of course, you probably know deep down that this isn't true. At least it's not true for other people in your mind. Like, you know that your loved ones are valuable just because they exist, but you might still struggle feeling that way about yourself. And that's understandable in a productivity oriented culture. You might also just feel like you're lazy or you're selfish if you take care of yourself or put yourself first. And, we all want to be accepted by other people. Belonging is a primal core human need. And so, as kids, we learn if you're selfish, you're rejected, you don't have friends. And so we tend to self-police as human beings to stay in line according to the behaviors that we think other people expect of us so that we can be liked, accepted, and survive. On the other side of things, you might also struggle putting yourself first because of some wounds that you have that make you feel like you can't trust or rely on other people. And so you really do feel like if you take a break and take care of yourself, you rest, you sleep, you nap, or whatever it is you want to do, take time to be with friends, you might feel like everything will fall apart if you don't carry that burden completely on your shoulders. Maybe it's your family, your kids' needs. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's a whole combination of things that you feel like you can't rely on other people. And so you just feel all this guilt putting yourself first because you also have this sense that everything will fall apart. And so it's completely understandable you feel this way. And yet, even though there's another part of you that knows that you shouldn't feel this way, you do. And we can't just force ourselves or talk ourselves out of feeling our emotions as human beings. You've probably tried many times to talk yourself out of feeling guilty for putting yourself first, but that really doesn't work because we feel what we feel. Our emotions really kind of originate from our body, and we can't think our way out of them. Instead, I want to talk to you about the first therapy technique to cope with this guilt about putting yourself first well. And this first technique is literally just let yourself feel the emotion. Give yourself some space to literally feel what you feel. Let yourself feel guilty. It doesn't need to be right or wrong. It just is. And so I invite you in this moment to literally pull up those sensations in your body of how you feel when you feel guilty, thinking about maybe taking time away from your family to go to the gym, or when you think about saying no to a friend's, birthday trip because you don't have the money right now. Just pull up that guilt that you have when you think about putting yourself first. Think about the sensations. A lot of us are going to have physical sensations like a sinking feeling or a gnawing in our belly when we think about that guilt. Just like this sinking feeling. Maybe it's even an anxious, like fluttery, like heart pounding feeling. Let yourself feel the sensation. I know it's uncomfortable, but literally giving yourself space to feel this is how you're going to cope well with this guilt. Because all emotions, when we don't suppress them, ignore them, deny them, numb them, or intensify them, like exaggerate them, think about them all the time, all emotions move like waves in the ocean. They're kind of coming and going. You might have had numerous emotions just as you've been watching this. And so the first skill comes from dialectical behavior therapy, and it's called ride the wave. You literally want to be willing to let yourself feel this emotion. Just be willing, feel the guilt, and then attend to the sensations in your body. Notice how it feels to feel this guilt. Let yourself feel it without creating stories about it. You don't need to attach to, I'm bad because I want to put myself first, or they'll hate me. No, just feel the sensation. Come back, attend to the sensation. And then you want to validate it for yourself. Instead of telling yourself you shouldn't feel this way, which is what most of us do initially when we have uncomfortable emotions, validate why it makes sense for you. Validate that it makes sense that you're afraid of being perceived as lazy. Maybe you were always expected to be a top performer at school growing up and get straight A's or get good grades. And so you learned that if you're not producing, you're lazy, you're selfish, you're bad, you're unlovable, whatever that is. Let yourself notice it makes sense. Notice that it makes sense you're afraid to trust others. Just validate it. Validation is just telling yourself it makes sense that you feel this way. And then finally, you've collected all this emotional energy as you sit with the feeling, as you create space for the sensations, as you validate it. And now you're just going to take a big exhalation. You're going to exhale that emotional energy that's built up inside of you from this guilt and release it with your breath. So I literally invite you to kind of notice that guilt in your body that you've been feeling and then push it out with your breath. A big exhale. And that's that ride the wave skill. And by letting yourself feel the emotion, you can move towards the next step of really emotional wisdom and maturity, which is discerning if acting on this emotion is helpful for you. And so in the case of guilt around putting yourself first, notice what the consequences of, honoring that guilt would be. So what I mean by that is if you give into the guilt around saying no to a friend, around, that you can't afford their birthday trip, and you tell yourself you're a bad friend, you might have the urge to then put the trip on a credit card and then find yourself in debt that takes you months or maybe even years to pay off. So notice the consequences of giving into your guilt. Or if you have the, urge to not go to the gym because you feel like you're a bad mom if you take that time for yourself in the evening away from your kids when you're already away so much, notice that you're, might not get movement then if you don't go to the gym. And then you're going to feel physically agitated because we need movement as human beings to kind of move our emotions, move kind of the stress of life. And then because you're agitated, you might snap at your kids, and then you're going to feel like a bad mom even more. And then you're going to feel extra guilty taking care of yourself, which just creates a vicious cycle. So if you give into this guilt, it's going to create a vicious cycle for you of stress, burnout, shame, exhaustion, whatever that might be, physical illness, physical, discomfort. And so the next skill to cope well with this understandable guilt that you have about putting yourself first is literally called opposite action, and it's also from dialectical behavior therapy. And opposite action is when you notice that giving into your emotion will cause you negative consequences, you literally do the opposite. So instead of yelling at your partner, you speak softly and kindly to them. And so here, instead of giving into this guilt and putting the trip on the credit card or not going to the gym, you literally do the thing that you don't want to do. And I know you're thinking, wow, if I could just do that, then everything would have changed. Like, that sounds not possible. First, I just want to validate that and say it can seem really silly to just have opposite action. But I find that when we can name the skills that we're using, when we can say, oh, I'm using this therapy technique, when we can name it, it kind of gives us a little bit of a boost. It gives us some courage. We can contextualize it. And I find that that's really helpful. Also, in addition to opposite action, I want to talk about the third therapy technique, which is to ride the wave, which is self-soothing and an act of taking care of yourself, by the way, and to use opposite action and do the thing that you're kind of putting off for yourself because you know the negative consequences of ignoring yourself are going to be far greater than the consequences of taking care of yourself. The third therapy technique is you will need to set limits on yourself. Boundary setting has two parts. It's the limits we set with other people, saying no to other people, but it's also about kind of setting limits on ourselves, saying no to ourselves, and being a healthy parent to ourselves when our urges to self-neglect or self-sabotage really get in the way of our dream life. And so here, to set internal limits on yourself, you speak to yourself and it's like, no, I know you want to just put this trip on the credit card because it seems easier than telling your friend no. But that's going to create so much stress in the future when you have this debt weighing on you that you need to say no. And I'm going to show you how. Or I know you don't want to go to the gym because you feel bad about not having time with your kids. And you need to go to the gym because when you come home, you're going to feel so much happier and you're going to be more present with them with the time you do have with them. And so by setting those internal limits on yourself, you build your ability to cope well with the guilt that you have about putting yourself first. And by the way, if you feel guilty putting yourself first, you probably struggle sometimes setting boundaries with others. And so you build your boundary setting muscle by practicing on yourself first, by setting those internal limits on yourself first, and then it becomes easier to do it with others. So with these three techniques, ride the wave, opposite action, and setting internal limits on yourself, you can cope well with the guilt that you have about putting yourself first, even if you feel it and can't talk yourself out of it. Eventually, you might feel less guilty putting yourself first, but here we have to show up what we are. And if you want more support in learning how to set boundaries on yourself and set those internal limits so you can hold yourself accountable to doing the healthy, important things for yourself and being courageous for yourself, I invite you to check out my book called Setting Boundaries: 100 Ways to Protect Yourself, Strengthen Your Relationships, and Build the Life You Want starting now. I know that this resource will be very helpful for you in learning how to put yourself first, even when you feel guilty, feeling more confident along the way, and then setting those limits with other people that you know you've been putting off as well. I sincerely appreciate your time and attention to this video. I am so excited for you to practice these three skills on yourself. I'd love to hear your feedback about how it's working, where you might be getting tripped up. I always love supporting you along your journey of finding more confidence, empowerment, and peace. And with that, I look forward to connecting with you in the next video, and I'm sending so much love for now.